Without further ado, I'm excited to hand the event over to our panel, which is Nick Santora, the CEO of Curricula, Corey White, co-founder and CEO of Cyvatar, and Craig Goodwin, co-founder and Chief Product and Strategy Officer of Cyvatar. So welcome, guys, and thank you again today for this webinar, and I'll hand it over to you guys.
Sounds good. Nick, do you want to go first?
Awesome. Thanks, Eileen. So yes, I am Nick Santora, founder, CEO at Curricula. I did my best here to try to zuck it up and wear a hoodie for this, since our talk is about how to not zuck. And I'm excited today just to have a conversation a little bit about, the privacy ethics, some of the things going on in your organization, some things that we could probably be questioning ourselves. Us as a company, if you aren't familiar with us, we make fun security awareness content. We also have software that helps distribute that content in an LMS format to employees to teach them about anything from security to privacy to ethics and compliance and things in between. And then we also have phishing simulations and everything else that you need to make your employees more secure. So thanks for having us here today to talk about this timely topic. And I'll leave it to you, Craig.
Sounds good. Corey, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my introduction so that you can actually introduce what Cyvatar is and who we are. So I'll make mine brief. So Corey White, just been doing cybersecurity stuff for the last 25 years. So that means I've kind of been there, done that, seen a lot of good, bad, ugly, and I'm excited to have this talk and just throw shots at people trying to do privacy, compliance, and security at the same time and figure that craziness out. So it's gonna be fun for me. So Craig.
There'll be no shots fired here. So yeah, just really quick. So Craig Goodwin, co-founder with Corey of Cyvatar. I'm on the opposite end of the fence to Corey. So I've been a chief security officer for end user organizations for about 20 years or so, mainly tech companies. So I've been dealing with this firestorm that is privacy, compliance, and security all wrapped up in one neatly packaged bundle for about 20 years or so. Really quick, just in the interest of introductions, Cyvatar, me and Corey have built a subscription-based membership organization, essentially, that allows you to consume cybersecurity much more easily, much quickly, and get to time to value really quickly on your cybersecurity solution. So that's what we built at Cyvatar. I wanted to kick this off. So I know in the abstract for this kind of webinar, there was a ton of different things in there, but I thought what might be useful to really kick it off is to get a little bit, and by the way, I'm leading this so that I don't have to answer any of the questions, so no throwing anything back at me, but I wanted to start on a personal note, really. So one of the first things in the abstract is about social media use, right? And of course, as we go through this, we can unpick the heart of what we're talking about here, which is consumer data, our data, how it's used by businesses, and we can move into the corporate side. But as a starter for 10, I wanted to touch on social media and how you guys view it, either as individuals or as businesses. So some people, you've got extremes, right? You've got extreme side who say, I've cut off all of Facebook, like I'll never go on it again. Like, I don't post anything on LinkedIn. I'll never touch Twitter. And then you've got the other side who are completely open and love it and check it every 2 minutes and all that kind of stuff. So, you've got both ends of those spectrum. I think for a start for 10, it would be great to understand kind of where you guys sit in that spectrum, how you view social media, knowing what you know about the industry, et cetera, et cetera. So Nick, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, that's actually a good place to start. So I am a avid Facebook and LinkedIn user. I'm on LinkedIn every single day to talk to people, get my news, everything like that. And it's pretty targeted. Facebook, I actually use to disconnect. So, I use that to watch like cooking videos and like silly things at nighttime to kind of get me to not think about all of the LinkedIn universe. Along the way, I think there's people that kind of get caught up and absorbed into these platforms to the point where the platform knows more about you than yourself because it's kind of targeting things towards you. So I guess I'm a believer and a user of both sides of this necessary or unnecessary evil that we'll talk about today.
Craig, I cannot believe you started with that one, because Craig and I rant back and forth about this all the time. All right, so I use LinkedIn every day and news from that. And if I'm extremely bored, I will open up Facebook. But I don't say anything on Facebook. I got, I don't know, like 300, 400 friends or something, but I don't say anything on Facebook. I was actually just looking yesterday. I actually hadn't posted in like 6 years or something like that. So I'm on it, but I'm not active on it. Kind of same thing with Twitter. I use it a little bit for business. But my revelation was a couple things. One, I refuse to be brainwashed. So I stopped really actively participating in those things. I'm one of those folks that think, yes, you're being brainwashed and targeted and everything.
Did you read my mind when I smiled at you then? It's like, we've got telepathy.
You were thinking that. So I used to fall into that. The other thing which I think is just interesting when you think about usage of those tools, it's funny if you're able to just look at it, like you said, Nick, just to get some good laughs and kind of disconnect. So I do use it in that way sometimes, but I realized one thing, and this actually shifted me more than anything else besides brainwashing. When I started this business and I sat down to focus and start building a business, I realized my phone was going off all the time. You know, all these different alerts, I couldn't focus. So that was the main reason why I turned everything off and turned off all alerts. I still have access. I just don't let it control when I'm popping up looking at stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, right? I think there's lots of motivations for doing both sides of it. Like me personally, I think for me, it's about knowledge. It's about knowing what you're sharing, right? So, you know, there is those extremes that we talked about, but at the end of the day, I don't know, I'll give you an example. I don't share my children's names or my home address on LinkedIn or Facebook, right? So that's not true, actually. My children's names are definitely on Facebook, so, but they're not on LinkedIn. But I think for me, it's about knowledge of what you're sharing, right? I understand, me and Corey, he mentioned to me, you know, and I know Nick, we had this conversation a little bit when we were doing some prep for this webinar, you know, we were chatting about kind of advertisement and who targets you. And we all know, I mean, I get 20 messages a day from recruiters on LinkedIn, for example, but I'm comfortable enough with getting those messages that I'll just ignore them, right? If I don't want to speak to that person, if I don't want to buy what they're selling as a wider analogy, then I just won't write back, you know? And actually it doesn't detract from what I'm doing. I'll just skim through it and move on to the things that I am focused on. And then every now and again, there'll be one that I am interested in and I want to use. You said something interesting about targeted ads specifically, Nick, when we were talking before.
Yeah, I mean, maybe my belief is not with the norm, but I kind of like targeted ads too. I used to run an advertising business. So I know a lot of kind of inner workings on how this stuff works and why it works and why it develops ecosystems and jobs for other people. But it is kind of weird, right? Every once in a while that you're, you know, I think it was a couple of years ago, I was at the gym and I was like, oh man, I hurt my neck pretty bad. I should go get a massage. And I was asked my wife about it. She's like, why don't you go look this place up? So I literally just texted it on my phone, like search a place. I opened up Facebook when I got home and I got like 16 different massage ads, home massagers. It's just, you know, you get to this point, you're like, all right, did they just step over the boundaries or were they very timely on my needs? And it's, you know, I guess, Corey, we were talking about like, when do you draw that line? And I think we as consumers don't know where the line is because it doesn't really exist.
Well, that's the point. No one's created that line. And so, yeah, I'll just say it. I personally think Facebook went over the line because they had the data. And I mean, I've watched all the movies on all and done. I love when I deep dive into research stuff. But it's interesting. So they needed to find a way to monetize Facebook because they had this amazing thing where we all could connect and learn about each other. And I was like, this is great. And I was always thinking in the back of my mind, God, how are they making money off of this? And so I'm sure they were thinking that. And then when they came in to monetize it, we ended up being the product. And then when they realized, wow, this is amazingly successful, then it got out of control because there was not a line. And that's what the problem is.
Yeah, 100%. And we're moving into kind of the corporate side now. So I think, you know, if we cut the BS out of this, you know, regardless of personally whether you use these platforms, don't use these platforms, like how you view them, whatever your view on that stuff, the fact is we know by one route or another our data is getting into these businesses, right? And I've worked in businesses in the past where, to your point, Corey, there was active board level discussions about like, we're gathering a load of data. Like, what do we do with this data? How do we make it pay for our business? So that inherently puts responsibility on those platforms and those businesses to
do the right thing, right? But what does the right thing mean nowadays? And we touched on it earlier, right? You've got this concept of compliance, people telling you what you should be doing. You've got privacy, which is legal and regulatory requirements based on how you handle and use that data. And then you've got a more abstract concept of cybersecurity and making sure that that data is secure. And there's definitely, over the last few years, certainly even over the last 10 years, a convergence, when I think about my role as a chief security officer, of all of those three components. And businesses are dealing with that differently, right? In some businesses, those things are incredibly siloed. You have privacy that sits within legal, you have compliance that sits within compliance or finance, you have security that sits within security. Other businesses are doing a better job of that, and those three things are coming together. I think as we look towards the corporate side, that's a really interesting discussion to have. So I'd love to get your views, perhaps start with Corey to begin with, on how you see those three individual components. Perhaps start with what they are, but then also how you see those things interacting together.
Yeah, I think actually you defined them pretty well, but how I look at it, I think about what is the driver of it. Me, I guess you always give me crap about being on the vendor side, but I've watched the evolution of it. It started with just security, right? Yep. We all wanted to be secure so we didn't get hacked. And then it evolved from that to compliance, and compliance was driven because companies weren't doing security the way they should have, and they kept getting hacked and people's information got taken. So then compliance came out, and you had to be compliant with these certain regulations so that they can force people to do security. And then now, with your CCPA and GDPR, privacy is really kicking in, because now we're seeing the abuse of it. But all these compliance and privacy regulations, all they're doing is trying to force people to do security that they should be doing it in the first place, but are not interested in doing, because it's not a business driver. Security, until it becomes a business driver, businesses won't do it.
Yeah. What are you seeing with your customers, Nick, about the gap between those three things?
I think you're right. I mean, it almost seems like they're all siloed, working towards their own missions, but working under the same roof. And I think this past year, with everyone going remote and just tools trying to be consolidated, you kind of saw for the first time all of these groups coming together to say, like, why are we trying to like battle each other separately with our own missions if we can kind of put this all under one roof? And we see this a lot because, as an online training company, we deal with the privacy group and then the compliance group and the security, and and then HR trying to throw their 2 cents in. So all of these teams trying to come together to communicate these things, I think, has been one of the most difficult things for companies this past year, was that they didn't realize how big the mess was, and they kind of expected things to be happening, and then realized that when people went remote and they're kind of starting to look at things more deeply, they realize the things that they expect aren't actually happening. And now that's what brings us to the reality of people doing things when you're not looking at them.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, just from a CISO's end user perspective, I think if you look, Corey touched on it a little bit, if you look at compliance as a tool to drive good security, I mean, ultimately, I would say it's failing, right? Because what you're forcing businesses to do is to just tick box exercises that allow them to, I give you a good example. Like, I always used to use the example of PCI DSS, right? You say something like, all credit card data needs to be encrypted, for example, or needs to be firewalled off, is an easier example, right? It needs to be firewalled off from everything else. Now, that's fine. Unfortunately, if you can just leak through the network from a technical perspective and get to that database, what difference does that make? The fact that there's a firewall there not stopping anything makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. Or you create a load of policies that are shelfware that tick a box, and you can tell an auditor you've got that policy, but if no one's reading those policies and they're not enacting them, it's absolutely pointless having them, right? And they just become that kind of shelfware from a policy perspective. And that, for me, like in a very stark example, highlights the difference. Whereas security would say, actually encrypt that data, actually stop people getting access to it. Compliance would say you need a policy, right? Which doesn't solve anyone's problem. And actually then it falls on the regulator or the compliance authority and the auditors to be good at their job, right? And find those holes and find what the essence of the rule is, as opposed to what the actual tick box says.
Yeah, I think, but the failure in that is that the people trying to get compliant don't understand security. in some cases, and probably a lot of cases, frankly. And so they will follow what it says for them to do, and they'll think that compliance equals security. And then that creates a failure. And then we've seen many cases where, I hate to pick on PCI, but there's a lot of other, regulations and, compliance. They're compliant, yet they still got hacked. And I remember when that first started happening, it was a head scratcher. Like, how are we hacked? We did all the right things. Not me doing tons of incident response. I've had those conversations and had to explain to executives and board members how they're completely separate things. And it was just, their mind was blown that is a separate thing. What?
Yeah, 100%. And then, that's compliance, obviously. What about privacy? Like, have you seen any impact, Nick, on your customers from GDPR coming in a few years ago? Now CCPA is coming along, in other states, other global organizations, or global companies, other countries and states are now trying to introduce very similar things. So how have you seen that drive kind of internal security and internal focus on data with customers, or has it at all?
Yeah, it's funny because we kind of see the trends before they come, because it's just panic button mode. And again, it's back to that privacy is becoming part of every company's responsibility, which it should have been since the beginning. But now the reason they're doing it is because there's compliance regulations coming. And that's sad that we had to get to this point for people to pay attention to the ethics behind data collection, data processing, and kind of what we do. We've seen, years ago when GDPR was coming out, it was panic button of, we need GDPR, we need to train our people on GDPR. It's like, you literally want to do it to check the box to say you did it. You could do that right now. You don't need us to do that. You could have a conversation with your employees about the things that need to be done. And we saw it more as a let's get everyone so we said we did it routine than reality. And I'll give you an example of that. When GDPR came out, there was a lot of panic actions taking place. One of them was to get explicit consent from the people that you have on your list to continue to have conversations with them. So in a panic mode, the entire world went out and built with their marketing teams these little consent things and just blasted out these emails saying, hey, please click on this cold email and consent to it. And I was getting hundreds of these things from people. I was like, who the heck is this? Like, I literally never gave any info to these companies. And what's funny about this whole situation is, on the security side of the fence, these were perfect phishing scenario templates. And I think we had some in our simulator to say, yeah, just fake GDPR consents, just send them out. People are clicking them every day, trying to opt themselves back in. And they didn't realize what they're doing in this big ecosystem is literally checking a box for compliance because the regulation says you need to send a consent thing out. And they weren't thinking about the actions they were doing.
It was funny. I remember at that time, I remember some tweet around that time saying something like, I'm gonna sleep better tonight. Thank God that, Nando's or Walmart or something, I know what they're doing about GDPR now. Like, thank the Lord that they've told me. Because I was really worried about that.
Crazy, but that's the reality. And I think, like, with compliance, always, whether we like it or not, it leads the charge on a lot of things inside of organizations, because it's more of a defensive mechanism to make sure that you're doing the right thing in the eyes of the board. And with privacy, I think we're at this early stage right now where I see it going that same direction of it's being done just for compliance, and they're not stepping back and looking at why GDPR, why CCPA, why all of these privacy regulations exist in the first place.
Yeah,
it's to do good stuff with privacy. It's to have some ethics and be accountable for it. And I would hate to see it steer towards the wrong direction in the next few years.
Yeah, I think accountability is a great word, right? Who ultimately is accountable within those corporations for ensuring that data is safe, is protected, is secured from a privacy and a security perspective. Corey, what do you think about the roles in the organizations?
The roles the problem is most people don't even have those roles existing. And you take, GDPR, where, you had a DPO, right? A data privacy officer, where that's a requirement, but there was a bunch of small companies that didn't have it, but they did work internationally. Then they're like, well, can I get a, consultant to be that and try to figure it out? And so it just goes back to, we got to figure out how to fill these gaps. and not have a checkbox gap filler, because I know a lot of companies, they just, oh, I'll insert this person to be the DPO, checkbox done. But they're not understanding the essence of why we're requiring those things in these laws. And it all goes back to, without, GDPR, CCPA, it'd be the wild, wild west with all of our personal data. And so we got to figure out, how do we enforce it and actually get security, and actually not be annoyed, kind of like Nick was explaining with those emails that are getting blasted out. It has to be a good balance.
Yeah, and so taking all of what you've said into account, like it's all great to talk about the problems, and Nick mentioned, starting to send out emails, like gut reactions and firing things off, but where the hell do you start, right? And in my experience, a lot of organizations will look for some kind of golden bullet, right? And that normally means technology. That normally means there's some vendor somewhere that is promising something that will take all your GDPR pain away, right? Or will take all your CCPA pain away. Like, you look at a product, you look at a website, and it goes, we got GDPR solved. Like, this is what you need to solve GDPR. So in my experience, a lot of the industry will start from that perspective, will start with technology, but we know, security's got to be part of kind of security, privacy, and compliance. We've got to combine all three: people, process, and technology, to ultimately be successful. Nick, I know you were talking about this recently. Like, when you think about privacy, when you think about the protection of data, how do you approach those three things? Like, where should people start?
Yeah, I think I call it the don't drown in the privacy ocean, where it's just, you could get overwhelmed to the point where it's like, I give up and drown in privacy and stuff. And in order to not drown in the privacy ocean, the place where I would suggest starting is start at the core of what your company does, right? If you get everyone on the same page, the board, management team, employees, things like that, is kind of the ethics behind what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think if you start there, it'll make everything else a lot easier, because it'll start to make sense on why you're doing what you're doing. And then on that whole suggestion of kind of like what comes first, right? The people, process, technology thing. We wrote an article about this recently, and it's, the way I look at it is kind of these three stages, where I believe process comes first, then people, then technology. And I know there's different opinions of here, but the reason I come to that conclusion is that without understanding the ethics behind it, and then understanding what you're actually doing, that's all part of a process. And I understand you need people to build that process, but like, even if robots built that, if it was scripted in your company, built by AI, you would have a process that comes together that says, these are the things we do and why we do them. And that's kind of the first step. From there, you dump a bunch of people into that process and you say, does this work? Does the thing that we're telling you to do make sense? Yes. Okay, let's put people in. Can they follow it? No, because they don't have any tools or anything to make sense of it. Lastly comes the technology component of helping the people follow that process. And technologies change every day, every month, every year, whether we like it or not. They will be replaced. We're using stuff today that will not be used in the future. So you always have to look at technology as a changing thing here, but all of it, when you work itself backwards, is kind of this full circle, repetitive nature of adopting technology to the process, looking at privacy with our people, and then looking at the process is meeting the initial goal statement we set out to solve. If it's not, then we're kind of just singing and dancing for the privacy compliance sake of doing all this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to disagree with you, but I do agree with you. I think, the great thing about the process bit as well, having come from kind of the security background, is it's normally the cheapest bit, right? Which is ironic, because people don't do it. And actually, it does take dedicated time, effort, and resources to find out what you have, how it's flowing, when we're talking about data specifically, what you've got and where it is. But actually, it's the cheaper part. You don't have to go and buy some shiny new tool. You don't have to necessarily go recruit people. You can start internally with your business to understand what those processes currently look like, where there's gaps, and how you can fix them. Corey, do you agree?
Yeah, I what I'm literally thinking right now is, can someone please just call Justin Timberlake, because we need to bring people, process, and technology back. Right? It needs to come back, because back in the day, that's all we used to talk about. But people, process died, and then technology became king. And I know why, because there's a lot of money in technology and technology sales, but everybody's missing the people process side of it. And that's why I'm so happy to be partnering with you Nick, and because that's what Cyvatar is doing, that's what Curricula is doing. We're bringing those two back together because that it needs to be that those three tie in very well.
And Craig, when you were, when we talk about the cheapest, right? It's financially, right? It's the cheapest, it's the least expensive because we can do this, but mentally and resource-wise, it's probably the most expensive because it actually requires you to have conversations, think, and invest your people into understanding the problem before you start buying technology to answer something you don't know what you're trying to answer.
Yeah, 100%. And then if you think about, the other components, one of the things that I think people always get wrong, Nick, and it's little bit off on a tangent, but a lot of people think about people as part of the security triad as being security awareness and training, right? Rather than the actual resources and people that are dedicated to the effort of security compliance and privacy, right?
Yeah. And that, and that's where, I look at it the same way, is that we're not the answer, right? We start the conversation for you. We're the kindling to the fire of knowledge, and we create these stories so that way you see it and you can experience it, at least as from a mental level. When you see it again, you can now talk about it. And what was crazy is you think kind of tying this all together to real life experiences that, some of the, in the past year, some of the stuff going on in the United States was related around the stimulus checks and uncertainty, and just, there was a lot of stuff. So part of our job was to help communicate how dangerous this could be, but it's the starting point, right? And then from there, it's up to the organization to have the mental capacity to have a discussion and communication with their employees about how this plays a role in the bigger picture of clicking things, but also sharing knowledge and stuff outside the company to an unknowing person. And our training doesn't solve that, it starts the convo. So I can't emphasize any more of what you just said, of that you can't solve this stuff if you don't start talking about it from the process people component.
Yeah, and you think about talking about it, it reminds me of a conversation we had a few weeks ago, actually, and it was completely unrelated to security, but I think someone said to me and Corey, when we were talking about a business subject, someone said to me, if you have to ask the question, you already know the answer, right? And I want to call BS on the privacy stuff right there with that kind of stuff. And it's the same with compliance, it's the same with security. How many times in my career have I had someone in a business come to me as CISO and say, I don't know, do I need to encrypt this data? That line would have equipped me so well a few years ago. If you're asking me that question, you already know the answer, right? And this kind of brings us on to the ethics of this whole conversation, right? It might say in some compliance or some privacy standard, you should or should, in fact, one of the biggest problems with GDPR when it came out is that it actually doesn't say whether you need to encrypt it or not. It doesn't go into that kind of detail, right? It says something like protect it effectively or something of that nature, which leaves it open to interpretation. But, follow me on this. If the standard says you need to encrypt certain types of data, you would do it because the standard says it. But I think, and this is where the whole Facebook conversation, social media conversation comes into part, as a business, ethically, you already know the answer to that question. Should we be encrypting this data? Well, yes, right? And you already know that answer. So if the answer is obvious, why is it that businesses are not just doing it anyway? Corey, what do you think?
Oh my God, you really want to? Okay. Because it in their minds, it costs them money. It slows down their business. And if they could find a way to sidestep it and not have to do it, they wouldn't want to do it. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about going way back in my Foundstone days, and we were just doing pen testing and hacking and everything else. I had so many people come to me, so you guys can hack into everything. You can get access into all these different systems and banks, and like, yes, we've done all those things. And well, how do you not use that for bad? And the Spider-Man movies were out at the time, and I would always say, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, I think that still applies even today. We have all this data from all of our customers that can be used maliciously. It also could be used really good. So Nick needs his neck is sore, he needs a massage, then that's cool. I like that scenario. I like getting targeted. I don't want to get, women's products targeted toward me. Why would I? I don't want to see that. I want to see what I would actually need. So if we're responsible with it, then that is how we, I don't know how we make people responsible with data. I don't know that answer. If I knew that, we'd probably be building a different company. But I think you get my point.
I think kind of what you said before is like calling BS on things. I don't think we're doing enough of that as a community to each other yet. And I think that's the way everything evolves, right? I mean, we call each other out as humans on all kinds of things. Like, I don't know, clothes people wear, food people eat, places where people live. I mean, we always are interacting with each other and saying things we like or don't like about each other. That's kind of how we do what we do. And at a certain point, when you go into the workforce and then the workforce turns into a community of people and the community turns into a company, we start to kind of push some stuff in the closet and push it aside from an ethical point of view, because it's all about what the community feels is right. And I think when we're getting into this next wave of privacy becoming a priority for every single company and having ethics, we gotta call each other out on it. And an example of that is trade shows, right? I mean, trade shows are great. You go to a trade show and everyone talks to each other and has a good time. And I guess a lot of us miss going and interacting with each other at these things. So we all move to these online trade show platforms, and they're not as good. Like, let's just be honest about that. It's just, they're not as cool. They're not as fun. They're not as good. And they're also buying trade show software from random companies that spun up out of nowhere that aren't looking at stuff the same way that we all look at privacy and security. And where I would call BS is after these trade shows, tons of data information being loosely sent around in emails. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of emails just being dropped all over the internet without anyone's knowledge of what's going on. So those are the moments where we need to call BS on people like that and say, what are you doing? Like, that is super dangerous. Do you not realize that? And if you don't, that's okay, right? We're here to talk about this, but we got to fix those things as a community and call each other out.
Yeah. My biggest problem with all that is there's a significant lack of bars and pubs in online trade shows. Like my small home office just doesn't have enough alcohol for that kind of thing. But no, I completely agree with you. And I think, thinking about that data and kind of that calling BS on the industry and talking about making people do what is right. One of the questions that came up in the chat, I think Gary popped it. I wanted to dwell on the fact that Amanda has said we all look really young. So that's the best comment we've had
exactly
for the course of this webinar. And I think we should just probably stop there because we'll take that one and leave. But drop the mic. But on a serious note, so Gary said like a C-suite is really important in all of these conversations, right? And I've been there as a CISO. You feel like you have the power. You love putting the fact that you're a chief security officer on LinkedIn. It's fantastic. Like, I look good to all my peers. But the reality is, and I've done a couple of talks about this, you're not truly a CISO unless you've got the executive ability to make a change, right? If your voice is not heard at the boardroom level, then you're not truly a chief security officer. You're not having the impact you need to have to hold that title. So, his question was around, how do we convince the board? And it comes to privacy, it comes to security, it comes to compliance. How generally do we convince the executive team, the leaders of our businesses, to do more about this? And I'll try and answer really quick, and then I'll let you guys jump in. So I think from my perspective, having done it for 20 or so years, it's about trying, well, it's a load of different things. Firstly, it's about tying it to business outcomes, right? I don't think as a security professional, we often think, and I hate it because I rail at CISOs for doing this, we think we're special, right? We think security is some subject that no one else can possibly understand, and that we're the only purveyors of security in the world and no one else could possibly understand us, and that we're special because security is more important than anything else. I'm afraid finance is a bit more important because you need to make money as a business if you to even have that job of CISO, right? So I would challenge that as a first token. And therefore, what we need to do as CISOs is communicate in a language that the business understands. I remember just really quick examples, and it comes from the security awareness side. Actually, we were building security awareness training programs at a company I used to work at, and that was a big plumbing and heating group, right? And the way that we articulated security there was around water leakage, because plumbers understood the concept of water leakage, right? So we would talk about security risk as if we were hemorrhaging water from pipes all over the organization. And it was a light bulb moment for people. Or, you know, in automotive, we talk about a mechanic, you know, that tells you how bad your car is, but refuses to fix it. Like, all these analogies are built up because that's what the business understands. And at the board level, if you communicate in such a way that the business understands and you make the effort and time to do that, you can be really more successful than trying to talk in, you know, crazy technical security language that they just don't get. Thoughts?
I agree. You know, that's why we have a business. We literally do that, and we break down these concepts into things that are familiar, into these mini stories. Another thing, you know, I guess 2 points on that subject there is, one is a lot of times you kind of feel like you're defending your position all the time. And to talk to the board and be as part of a management team, you should all be defending the company staying alive, right? I mean, you're all working on the same team. For some reason, we all come into these discussions and positions as kind of an adversarial discussion around supporting something, and it shouldn't be like that. So setting the tone from the get-go on we should not be acting that way, and then you'll have a lot more progress. The second component of that is based off kind of like adopting the stories and the conversations to things that make sense. One thing that I've seen work both in my career and also with customers of ours is talking about things through an actual narrative inside of your company. So let's say you're the plumbing company, right? And the example being, hey, we're gonna, I don't know, we need to invest in X amount of security budget on something because let's walk through the adventure of all of our contracted plumbers that would go out for these different pieces of equipment that we order. If something happens, they do not get that equipment. If they do not get that equipment, this will lead to this many canceled contracts and this many employees leaving, us getting lawsuits from here, this happening from here, these people having to get fired, us having to go out and do this. And you could literally paint the picture exactly as it would happen inside of your organization specifically. When you communicate in a narrative of that format, not only does it psychologically and scientifically work, because that's kind of what we're all about, but you'll get people bought into your budget and conversations a lot more because you're speaking the company's language, not just a language that makes sense, but you're speaking exactly to the risks that you're here to protect and why they have you in the first place. So I can't advocate enough of following that pattern, and you will find that you're not defending your position, you're helping everyone recognize why your position's there.
Corey, any additional thoughts?
No, Nick, you did one hell of a job answering that. And I know we got questions in the chat. This is about, you know, the attendees. So I don't know, Craig, you want to kind of go through and let's pick some questions and answer them?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's sum up real quick. So in terms of, I think from what we've spoken about, you know, privacy, security, compliance, I think it's a bit of a flowery answer, and I'll let you guys give your kind of summary stuff. But I think there's got to be, and I like what Nick was saying about, you know, everyone's responsibility. There's loads of parts of this industry that need to kind of stand up and be a focus on this. And I think, Corey, we deal with it a lot of times with kind of SME type businesses where enterprise organizations are stepping up a bit more and expecting not just compliance, but better security from SME and SMB businesses, right? Which helps the supply chain, ultimately helps the protection of that consumer data. And we exist within the B2B space, and Facebook B2C, you know, and B2B actually, but across both of those components, there's just that emphasis on doing the right thing. You know, whether you're B2C, B2B, small, large, whatever, it's about everyone coming together to do the right things, whether that's on an individual basis or a corporate basis. I think it's really important. And, you know, we hammered compliance and privacy a little bit today, but I think the essence of what we're trying to do there is the correct one, right? Is trying to create ways and standards that allow organizations to be better at securing data of individuals, of citizens of the world, right? And I think that trajectory is the right one. It's just we all need to come together to really solve it as one. Any comments, and we'll jump into the questions.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I think what you summarized, I was just thinking about, we talked about people, process, and technology and kind of the Venn diagram of that, but you have the business driver for why people are doing these things around security. Then you have compliance. I put compliance, privacy, and security all in one bucket as well. But then the third one I think we really neglect is what you just talked about, is it is the right thing to do. So we got to look at, in my opinion, all three of those perspectives. And that's how we should make decisions. I think there's so many companies that take, oh, we're driven from business perspective to just do compliance. And that's the only reason why they're doing it. And they take out the security and everything else and the right thing to do out of that equation. And so I think we got to be able to combine those. And that's what our strategy should look like for the industry, period.
Absolutely. And I like I would echo that the ethics statement is probably the place we need to start. And, in legal terms, right, there's a reasonable person is something that there's a definition of that. And we can all agree on kind of what that is. There's gray area, but we use that in a court of law, what a reasonable person would do to make judgments on legality of how we act. So I think what a reasonable person should and should not do has to be established in this privacy world. So I think that's where we start from a tactical level on advice here. I mean, my former background before starting Curricula, I worked as a compliance investigator auditor for our power grid here in North America.
I didn't know that, Nick. Can you come out as a
it was not as fun as what I do now, I'll tell you that. But I've seen kind of these kumbaya moments where, groups come together literally for the first time during an audit to have these conversations and say, have we ever talked about ethics here? And it's just, that's crazy. So we need to bring our teams together that are working in silos to solve this bigger mission of privacy, and not for the first time during an audit. It should be on a continuous basis where we're not feeling like we're, drowning in the privacy ocean, where, hey, we're all taking our little rowboats out and we're going to meet up in the ocean and we'll swim back to shore every once in a while to move the needle just a little bit more. But if we start that convo now, progress will be made in the next few years. If we all just wait till another regulation comes down our throats to meet, we're going to feel like we're drowning, and we will drown in the privacy game.
Yeah, 100%. I've loved talking to you guys, but I'm bored of my own voice, and Aileen's got a much nicer voice than all of us. So I'm going to let her jump in and ask some of the questions that the attendees have been asking, and we can have a go at answering them.
Hello. Okay. So I think you guys answered Gary's question on the fly about C-suite execs. But Gary, let us know if you want us to expand on that at all. But Amanda, she did mention how young you guys look, but she also asks, she aspires to become a CSO or a CISO in the next 10 to 15 years. If you guys can keep it brief, how did you get to where you're at your age? And we'll start with Nick.
Oh, man. Kind of being thrown into the fire and actually coming out alive, I think, has been my story since I was younger. I've never expected anyone to hand anything to me. I've always sought out opportunities at the right time and right place. And I've made the best I could with all of that. And I think because of that, I've followed kind of the traditional security path, which meeting the right people at the right time, I forced myself into the next path, which ultimately gave me enough knowledge and insight to see a bigger problem to solve. And that's what got me to where I am today. But I would say the hustle is probably the primary driver behind that.
I can't answer it because I'm actually 75 years old, Amanda. So I'll just give me Greg from CISO here.
Yeah, I think, specifically with CISO stuff, I always advise people, firstly, to go wider rather than deeper, right? I think a lot of security, and it's fine if it's what you want to do. If you want to go down the technical route, then absolutely have at it. But people probably put themselves into a hole, right? Going too deeply down one particular strain of security. Like, my advice has always been to people that want to go management orientated or go CISO ultimately, is to get wider, like learn about more things. Like, you need a bit of depth, but you don't have to be a hands-on penetration tester, for example, to ultimately become a CISO. In fact, me and Corey talk about it a lot. I would say it's almost a negative, right? Actually, you need to be wide rather than deep. So, you know, that would be my first thing. And then secondly, like, just be interested in business. I think the thing that's really differentiated me through my career is that it wasn't just security I was interested in. I've always been genuinely interested, like we've talked about today, in driving the business with security. Like, how can I find ways to make the business that I'm in better because of the skills that I have and the experience that I have? And I think if you've got that genuine interest and that genuine passion in driving forward the business and not just security, I think that'll stand you in really good stead. So they would be my two things.
I agree with that 100%.
Thanks, guys. And Angie asks, what is your opinion on SOC 2? And Corey, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, why don't we start with you, Corey?
I'll give a couple answers. One, I love it. It's a major driver for us getting business, honestly. But it's interesting that I think we talked about it this whole time. SOC 2 is what makes people that would normally not do security. And it, I think it's a good thing because it's forcing all these companies that would just not care about your data. Even if they were ethical, they would not care to actually secure it without SOC 2 putting certain things in place. And not saying it's perfect, because it isn't. No, none of them are. But I actually think it's a good thing that is being enforced and people are requiring it. And we have many, many customers saying, hey, we can't even get these big customers until we prove that we're doing the basics of security. And then some are even asking for SOC 2. So I think we're heading in the right direction. We just got to manage it a little better.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. It's kind of this like circle of trust, and how do you establish it? And that's a way to do it, right? That's one way. There's a million other ways. There's also filling out 25,000 security questionnaire lines. So it's just, you know, it's how you get there, right? And it's making sure people are doing the things that you would expect they're doing, that being an actual third-party attestation to things actually happening. So, you know, from our point of view, we see a lot of the high growth startups that are coming in and like heard about SOC 2 yesterday and then trying to get compliant today type stuff. They put someone in charge that has no background in compliance, no background in security, no background in privacy. They're just an operations person. And that's typically the persona that we see come into this role that seems dramatically overwhelming for them, where we also see them dramatically unqualified to fulfill. And that's where they need to go seek out help for, I don't know where to start. I'm panicking. I got to get this stuff done. And that's not how we should all feel about going through these experiences. It should be something that they are navigated through at a pace that they should be navigated through, and also understand why they're doing what they're doing and what they're actually doing. And I think if we don't align there from the get-go, it's just turning into another check the box thing to say you did it, and then no one is really understanding why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, it's funny. I love that because I remember sitting on a panel with another CISO a few years ago when I was a CISO, and he said to me, like, we'll never send out those questionnaires. It was a really big company. He was like, we never send out those questionnaires because they're, to your point, Nick, completely useless. Like, it's compliance orientated, it's tick box, doesn't tell me how good the security is. Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, from that very company who we were trying to work with, I get that questionnaire. So I phone him up and I say, thought you said you didn't. Oh, no. What I meant was security doesn't send them, compliance sends them, right? So, you know, to your point, that hits the nail on the head. Like, what are you trying to achieve with it? You bring, like we've said for the last hour, right? Bring those parties together. Like, what is it you're really trying to do? And my favorite word, Corey's bored of me saying it, is trust, right? Is the whole point of that is trying to build up trust in the supply chain. And when you break down those barriers and you understand what you're trying to achieve with it, well, it sometimes actually changes. We've gone way off topic from SOC 2 here, but SOC 2 is one of the tools with which to do that, right? SOC 2 is a trust standard. It's designed to try and build trust in your processes as an organization. That's what it's for. But at some point, we've kind of diverged away from that and made it a tick box exercise. So we've got to go back to that essence, which is about enterprises building trust in their supply chain. I think that's what the essence of it is. And if we all look at it like that when we use SOC 2, well, then it's a good tool.
Thank you for that thorough response, guys. Mohammed had a really great question. can you talk about cybersecurity in the future of the digital world, which scientists say revolves around quantum technology? I know Corey's going to love this one.
I think I made absolutely clear that I'm not the technical one.
So frankly, we could probably have a whole side conversation about this. That give this the short version of it. Number one, we're still a long way off, but there's a great book just came out, "The Future is Closer Than You Think." Whereas literally a year and a half ago, I was speaking about we will be living in the metaverse in less than 20 years, not knowing anything about COVID. And so really the metaverse is really a completely virtual world, where you have avatars, where you're not actually interacting with people, you're not driving to work. And then I was literally speaking of that in the fall of last year, and then COVID hits, and it actually fast forwards a lot of these things. So so when you think about quantum technology, I think there are a lot of steps that have to happen before we get there. Like Craig and I talk about, what we're building in the future in AI-based CPSO before you get to quantum, technology. It's steps that we just got to go through before we get there. I'm saying that in the light that we will get there quicker than we think, because there are a lot of things that are going to force that to happen faster.
Good answer. We're trying to get people to not use PowerPoints. So I feel like we're pretty far away from
I love
that future. So it's like, we still got a while to go to get the community there, but yeah, pretty solid answer, Corey.
Nice.
All right, we'll take two more questions. So Gary asks, do you think the onslaught of SaaS services and hosting, such as Outlook 365, moves companies farther away from their own security practices as they rely on the SaaS providers instead?
Great question. Yeah, so shared responsibility model, my favorite subject in the whole world. So I know we haven't got long, so I'll just take my slightly different slant on it. Like, as a CISO, as a security person in a business, I was one of the first that freaking loved this. Like, I went against the grain. What you tend to get in security is this fear, uncertainty, and doubt thing, where all CISOs kind of feign terror when their data's going somewhere else. Now, particularly as a smaller business, or a business, and we had the conversation earlier, is struggling to get enough budget for security. Like, if Amazon have got my data and they provide me with tools to protect it, Amazon have got infinitely bigger security budgets than most of my organizations ever did. And it's a real differentiator for them. They've got it right. So if I've got the opportunity as a CISO to use those tools, have at it. Like, I'll have them. Thanks very much, right? And therefore, when I look at SaaS tools, for the most part, and obviously they differ, so I'm being a bit rash, but for the most part, those businesses have the means to protect your data built within their products. If they don't, that's a different conversation. But as a smaller organization, like, I'd use everything I can. Office 365, turn it all on, like, use what they're offering, use what they've got, and you can increase your security posture at almost no cost, right? If you're already not using some of those tools, turn them on and use them. Like, that's what I would say. Look at it positively. Look at what they have got. Look at what they have using, and take advantage of the money that they're spending on security, because you as a customer are demanding it.
And to support that, I would say, coming from an industry that was highly regulated for utilities in North America, the compliance stuff wasn't written for any of this reality. And I think for them, I mean, what was this, 5-8 years ago now, that I kind of, on the tail end of my career there, was working on virtualization for the industry, where you physically had to own these boxes at your facility. Otherwise, it was out of compliance. Same thing that Craig was just saying, is that security operations centers, like, you can't hire enough people internally to do what these outsourced SOCs can do for you at a thread of the cost. So I think just as a community, we have to realize where our weaknesses are and understand that our core competency isn't to do every single thing. Our core competency is to do what our business does. We are supporting it as advisors and experts in different ways. And we have to realize that just because we use a third party, they're not doing everything for us. There's a shared responsibility and infrastructure security between the two. If we get there, I think, at least what I've seen over the past decade, we are moving there, but I think there's some slow moving industry still.
Thanks, guys. Okay, and last question, And if you guys have more questions for our panelists, I'll put their email in the chat as they're answering the last question. So you can email them your questions since we're not going to get to all of them. But Mohammed asks, what is the balancing factor for an organization to combine the technological aspects with the business and social side?
I'll jump in. I love Mohammed's questions. Anyway, so I think the challenge is, and we've seen this happen in the last 20 years or so, is that there's a blurring of the lines. It used to be business, I had to be a certain way business when I'm looking at technology or anything. It was just a certain way you had to approach it versus social, this is a separate person. So everybody would go to work and be a different person. And then, when they go home, they're a different person. Well, what I think we need to start doing as it relates to technology is thinking of them as the same and combining them together. Because if you think about, I'm at work, there's my work laptop. I still got all the social stuff, LinkedIn, Twitter, all those things there. And yeah, a couple of them are separate accounts, but it's still the same thing. So we really need to start thinking about, from technology, there isn't really that separation. You have, your whole BYOD, bring your own device, that has merged these lines. To me, they're the same. So I'll let the other ones chime in.
Yeah, I think, and this is must be Nick's core subject here, because like when I've talked about security awareness and training in the past, that's where it kind of started for me, was, cultural change can't be just about work, because people switch off then. It needs to, we have to deal with security in our day-to-day lives, whether it's banking security or, social media or whatever it is. That stuff's got to bleed over into me and Corey were having a conversation the other day and talking about Cyvatar, and I was saying, look, if anyone has to ask me about their work-life balance, like, we're doing something wrong. And that shouldn't be a question anymore. Like, you do what you need to do to get your life done, like, regardless of whether it's work or personal, like, you do what you need to do. And I think that's been even more apparent in the last year or so.
Yeah, I would exactly. We echo it. Personal life is part of your work life, but it's how do you bridge the commonality? Same example I was doing before of the trade show, blasting around emails and stuff like, hey, give me your kids' names, emails, address, social security and stuff. Just give it to me. I'm going to put it in an Excel sheet. I'm just going to put that on Reddit. I'm going to forward it all over. Is that cool? And when you say that, it's like, there's no way you're going to do that. Well, that's what you're doing at work. So we got to get people to feel that same weight when they're doing things at work that are unethical or they don't know how much harm it's causing, and find that kind of commonality of privacy and security.
All right. I think that's a wrap. Thank you guys so much. And thanks for all the fantastic questions from our attendees. Just great conversation. And I hope you all got some key takeaways and that you join us for Data Privacy Day next year.